Alright, hello GaP Bookmarker fans. I know there's at least one of you out there. Actually, my last video book report went over pretty well, so I'm just going to keep doing them. This one's kind of a cheat, really, because it really wasn't work for me to read this, but I was kind of looking forward to this book. But I'll get to that. It's called Comic Book Fever by George Khoury, but I'll get to that in a second. A couple weeks ago at Newbury Comics, they had their buy two of their graphic novels, which is a $60 word for comic books, comic book collection in a trade paperback or hardback, and get one free. So I ended up getting Superman cover to cover. Now, Superman's been a big favorite of mine. It wasn't my first comic I ever picked up. My first crush was actually Wonder Woman. We'll get to that in a second too. But let's just say that if a parent, if a kid from 1975 gets a comic book, basically to shut him up, which is what my mom did, opened up like this Wonder Woman comic, and my mind was completely blown. You have this woman who can, well, ride on air currents, if not actually fly. She had an invisible plane, and she could deflect bullets with her bracelets, and she was an Amazon from the mythical Paradise Island, and she had a golden magic lasso that made you tell the truth. That's pretty mythic stuff. Anyway, I was suckered in from that point, and of course it didn't take me long to discover Superman. Now, I've been interested in the character. He's probably one of my favorite characters, although I don't think he gets a lot of respect because he's so hokey, corny, and, you know, all-American Boy Scout. But what people don't get about Superman, including probably the latest movies, is that Superman has godlike power, but he chooses to do good with it because of his Midwest farm and upbringing from Ma, Pa, and Ken. But anyway, I want to get into that. But all I want to do, this is basically a celebration of the different comic covers since Supes was introduced in 1938 for the first time. Using that as a bookmarker. But it's basically a celebration of who he is, and of course that's just, you know, who he is and what he was like over the years. And make no mistake, that was the funny weeks. We went to that page. That's the very first issue of Action Comics in June of 1938. Basically, when the superhero genre was born out of whole cloth. There are many antecedents before Superman and before Batman, but he was the first de facto superhero in the medium that would define superheroes, and that's comic books. Superheroes have pretty much ruled comic books since comics have been created. But basically, you just have different themes that a lot of artists picked from, like his past, his family, like Supergirl, which of course she has her own TV show now, and I think Melissa Benoist is doing a great job. But Legion of Super Pets, of course. If you have the Legion of Superheroes, you have to have the Legion of Super Pets. And just all these different iterations of Superman throughout the years. And it was good just going through them. Now remember, I had that one when I was a kid. Big favorite. Now Superman, think of Superman and all of his adventures as a gigantic superstructure. Okay, it's been around since 1938. Superman and Batman and characters like him, iconic characters like him, Green Lantern, The Flash, they're all going to outlive us. I mean, short of a nuclear war or the civilization ending, they're going to outlive us. And maybe even then, someone will remember it and start publishing comics again out of the radioactive rubble and create tales of heroes that we can derive inspiration from. But yeah, it was just fascinating to skip around Superman's history and just see where he's been and how he's been interpreted over the years. That's Alex Ross, one of my favorite artists. The Norman Rockwell Museum down in Stockbridge, Massachusetts had an exhibition of him, and I went through really crappy weather. I went there, and Alex Ross is basically superhero illustrations Norman Rockwell. And the museum made the link. Excellent stuff. But yeah, just a really nice retrospective of him during all these different media he's been involved with. I mean, obviously the Silver Age is very, very corny, but that was the time period. And no, just really good stuff to listen to. Comics are now a viable art form, even though the films are paid, superhero films are paid more attention to these days rather than the source material. Okay, now the actual book I read, I've been kind of waiting all summer for, is Comic Book Fever by George Khoury, a celebration of comics from 1976 to 1986. Now, how to explain this? This is pretty much just like every baby boomer thinks that Simon and Garfunkel's Bridge Over Troubled Water is aimed directly at them. This book, I believe, is aimed directly at me and kids who grew up with comics from that time period. Ever since my mom, let's just say, I did not have an ideal childhood. We'll just keep it at that. And Mom giving me that issue of Wonder Woman just gave me an escape hatch to get the hell out of this, shall we say, bigger than life events I couldn't quite understand. It was pretty tumultuous, but comics were my escape. So basically, all this stuff pretty much covers all the stuff that I remember, and some I don't, because I couldn't be into everything. But just to give you some examples, I'm going to have to go backwards in time because it's easier to flip through the book. Of course, you have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I was working in a comic store when that came out. I didn't get into it then, but the artists Eastman and Laird come from my area of the country, a little bit hometown. As a matter of fact, there's go back one page here. Come on. There's the check right there, based on Amoskeag National Bank in Bedford, New Hampshire, where Eastman, I forget his first name, paid for the first print run of his comic, which you're looking at there. It was basically a parody of Frank Miller and The Dark Knight Returns and X-Men at the time and all that stuff. They just put all the stuff they loved into a comic, and it just took off. But as we go back in time, this book celebrates all these different things that I was into, like John Byrne. He was into the Fantastic Four that I read. His run is spoken of in the same breath as Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, but I pretty much have his entire run. Crisis on Infinite Earths, where Supergirl and the Flash were killed off, and ironically they both have their own TV series now. So that was supposed to clean up the entire DC universe to make it easier to read. It didn't. We'll just put it that way. And of course, Marvel had Secret Wars, where that costume was introduced. We go through different artists who made an impact. What else? Some independents, like Steve Rude's Nexus, which I have to admit I never got into. Frank Miller's Daredevil, which now the current TV series is mining for ratings gold. What else do we have here? Teen Titans, of course. When Robin stepped out of his Batman sidekick role and led the Teen Titans. And, let's see what else. Handbook of the Marvel Universe tells you alphabetically everything you needed to know about every single superhero in their canon, and DC followed up. DC and Marvel are pretty much the two main superhero rivals, the two big titans with competing cultures and competing ways of approaching superheroes. Let's see. Love and Rockets, I have to admit I never got into them. Probably because there wasn't superheroes in them, sadly. But really, I understand it's really cool stuff with a very punk indie motif to it. I really should read them eventually one day. Everything's collected these days, so why not? What else do we have here? How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, more artists. What else? Sal Buscema, Firestorm. Yeah, this is all the stuff that used to be on the comic racks when I was a kid, and it's pretty much, yes, there was an actual Pope John Paul II comic, believe it or not, from Marvel Comics. Yeah, let's see, going back, color forms, remember those? Love me some color forms. ElfQuest, which I didn't know anything about, I have to admit. Again, probably no super. Kool-Aid Man. I'm just kind of picking up the highlights here, because I don't want to bore you to death, because I know not everyone's into comics. Alice Cooper was in his own comic once. I remember the ads for that. The Kiss comic that Marvel did. And of course, Marvel did Star Wars, which they took a gamble on it, and of course, they hit gold. They went beyond the movie, and I have many of those runs. What else? Keep flipping through. I hope there we go. When Hostess Fruit Pies did advertisements in the comic books, But you'll notice here they just basically they create a crime, and the hero comes in and lobs a frickin' snack cake at them, and that pretty much solves the crime. And everyone from Superman to Wonder Woman to Batgirl over on DC, Superman, and Marvel, Spider-Man, the Hulk, they all were spokesmen for Hostess cakes. And I really wish someone would do a coffee table book of that. I would buy that in a heartbeat. It's a big part of my childhood. See what else here. Of course, the awesome Superman and Amazing Spider-Man team-up. Now, DC and Marvel were huge rivals at the time, so this is the very first intercompany crossover. And this was big stuff. When I was a kid playing in the schoolyard, playing superheroes, I used to get in a tizzy if someone chose a hero that wasn't part of DC and Marvel. I was a total Sheldon about it. But you can't be Spider-Man, I have to be Batman, and they're not from the same company. Sad, right? But anyway, and let's not forget Muhammad Ali versus Superman. I have to admit I never read that just because it never really appealed to me. I remember seeing that out all the time in the backs of comics. And, of course, all these ads, and they cover Grit newspaper. And this is pretty much my heyday for comics way back in the day. Of course, the X-Men, when they were popular, when Chris Claremont and John Byrne did his groundbreaking run of the X-Men, very adult storylines, very cool, which, of course, the movie's completely screwed up. Marvel's groovy fireside books. Many of these I borrowed from the library, and now I've since picked them up. Nice little Stan Lee basically waxing nostalgic on how he created these superheroes, and good stuff. Archie, of course, who didn't collect Archie back in the day. Just like I said, of course, Harvey Comics, Richie Rich, and Casper. I've read a few of those, and G.I. Joe, Adventure Team with Bullet Man. But yeah, this is the stuff I grew up with and I loved. But I'm going to go back to a section here where in the 80s, comics kind of grew up with Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen, both of which have been made into movies, kind of watered down movies. But at that point, there they are. Comics became cynical because they took a very dark. Alan Moore did Watchmen, and Frank Miller did The Dark Knight Returns. And today's darker take on Batman, more realistic take on Batman, can be traced back to him and Neil Adams, and actually back in the 40s, but this is when the latest revival of it, I would say. And I have to say, as much as I love comics, as great as these two works were, they have a lot to answer for, because after that, Marvel and DC mindlessly imitated the somber, dark tone of the comics and just took the fun out of superheroes in the sense of wonder. So, yeah, both of these are on my bookshelf, but, I don't know, they mark kind of an end of an era to me. Whereas, comics were a lot of fun once upon a time, and then all of a sudden they had to be like, these ponderous, dark, dystopian commentaries on society and comics itself. But, yeah, so that's what my midlife crisis looks like. Some people buy a sports car, convertible. I whipped through that. It took me a while because I didn't want to end it pretty soon. Because I mix my reading up quite a bit between magazines and books and everything like that. But every book I actually read or go through, I'll post up here. But anyway, it's going on 14 minutes now, so it's kind of long enough. We all have things to do. But that's the GaP Bookmarker, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening. Bye.